and we're at the speed down to 2,500. That's your 23.
Yep, flying for heavy, reduce speed to 180.
BlackBox.
I'm actually nervous talking to the great professor here today.
Yes, it must be so intimidating.
Yeah. So we're recording, right? So I want people to know how nervous I am to talk to Professor John Toomey of Old Dominion University, because you're in a field that my son, he should be the one interviewing you today, because he's a music geek. I'm not that I'm calling you a geek, sir.
I've heard worse.
But I'm intrigued. I love music, but I just don't have, and anything after the but stinks, So what stinks for me is that I love and appreciate music, and especially I have a massive appreciation for jazz, and that's what we're going to talk to you about today. But it's a unique gift that I think God has given many people on this planet like yourself. And you chose this field of not only being a performer, but also being an educator. And that's unusual, kind of, I think, to have your foot in both camps, especially at the level you've played at and some of the accolades that you have. So all of that to say, help me welcome Mr. John Toomey. And Noah, my fact checker, had told me that you were a doctor. So, we were going to call you Dr. Toomey. So we're going to let ODU know.
I would appreciate the promotion.
So we're going to give you an honorary KP's BlackBox doctorate today.
That's very kind of you.
I don't know what you can do with that. We'll print one out for you.
You see if I can turn it into a higher salary.
There we go. Let the chancellor know, hey, this is
That's right.
This is the I just got this doctorate, so I don't know who I'm accredited by, but there you go. You've got it. So welcome. We'll give you our studio audience. Appreciate you being here today. We were pre-recording. We were talking in our little makeshift green room, our lunchroom, about some of the things we were going to discuss today. But as we were coming in the studio, I told you I like to do a little toast to our nation's military, and you actually told me your father was a B-52.
Well, he was actually he was probably a B-24.
B-24.
I misspoke. He was in World
Maybe
War.
you did say 24. I just added some numbers.
I think he probably started training with a B-17, and then he was in the B-24 as a bombardier navigator. So he was using that Norseman sight, and he would tell them when to drop them.
Pilot to bombardier. Pilot to bombardier.
Yep, 32 missions over Germany. Not a scratch.
Whoa.
And then he came back, and years later he was called back to start training on B-52s to get ready for the Korean War. And he was ready to go, and then he got sick, and it ended up contracting polio.
Oh, my goodness.
In the hospital for a year, and when he came out, completely paralyzed on one side. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So the year your father brought you to this planet, what year were you born?
57.
57, so not too long after that.
Right, not terribly long, no. Yep.
So did the paralysis last his entire life?
Well, they told him it would, and I remember him telling me a story about they would line us all up in a row and hand out a Dixie cup to everybody, and the winner would be the person who could make a crease. And that's how little strength they had.
Jeez.
So when he came out, he was in a wheelchair.
Wow.
And I remember a story my mom told me that I always thought was interesting. My oldest brother, Michael, he was around when my dad came back.
Okay.
And they were sitting at the dinner table, and he did something, and my dad said, knock that off. You need to stop that right now. And he said, what are you going to do about it? You can't get to me anyway.
Uh-oh.
And my mom stood up and wheeled him over to where my brother was sitting. He was like, uh-oh, whack. It's like, are you still mobile?
That's funny.
He came out in a wheelchair, and they told him, this is going to be your life. But he didn't accept that, and he kept working and working. And when I grew up, I saw my dad walking, bowling, using the arm that was paralyzed. It was very thin, and so with his other leg.
Just some atrophy there.
Yeah, so he would have to lean up, even to just nail a nail into the wall. He would have to lean into it. So I would watch him just go through his life as if nothing was wrong. And you'd have to study him for a bit to realize, there's something going on there.
So after your father served our nation's military, what did he do after? after the
Then he started working for an insurance company.
Oh,
and
cool.
Ironically,
Way
he
to go.
became a claims adjuster. So he would sit there and be interviewing some guy who would explain why he hasn't worked for 6 weeks because of the splinter in his finger. And my dad's sitting there, You know, of course, he's walking around with the brace on.
So we're going to give
interesting.
you a pass today. You told me, I was like, hey, I'd like to do a toast, but you're like, Kenny, you know, I don't partake of the spirit. So we'll let you go with water today.
Oh, there you go.
Mr. Toomey. So love to give a toast to your father. Your brothers were also served.
Yes, all my brothers have, and of course for everyone that has and is serving.
Yeah, cheers
Absolutely.
to you. Thank you for your service. We appreciate you. And hopefully one day Johnny Walker will send us some big magnums here to resupply us.
There you
This is since we've been doing our podcast with this new magnum, we're at this is number 24, 25 now. You know, we've 25 episodes. We've put a hurting on that bottle there, and I promise I'm not drinking it any other time of the day. It's just when we do our podcast. So, Blue Label, help us out, help our nation's military.
There you go.
We appreciate those guys. You know, my wife's dad was a Thud pilot in Vietnam, so there was actually a Netflix series out about Thuds, and actually I think that's the name of it. It's a great watch if you get a chance to see it. Man, it shows you what some of our young airmen went through. And
Is that the one? Are you talking about the 130? Or
yeah, the Thud was. Can you look it up and help me what?
because just last
jet
night
that was?
I just happened to be watching a program about the Air Warriors, and they were talking about the C-130.
No, that's the big guy. These
Yeah.
were, I think, F-111s, and my father-in-law was going to kill me for not knowing this. But it is fighter jets,
Oh, okay.
fighter bombers,
Fighter
and
bombers,
their main mission was to take out SAMs, surface-to-air missiles.
Oh, okay.
F-105s, that's right. The
Yeah,
Thud.
my one of my brothers, Kevin, was a F4 technician, and they were the wild
F4
weasels. They
fan.
would go after the
Yes.
same exact thing.
Yeah.
He'd do these thing called hot shots where they'd leave it running and say this isn't working, and he'd jump in the cockpit and have to diagnose quickly, fix it, and then bam.
Oh, my
They'd
gosh.
take back off because he was involved when they went over to Bahrain and stuff.
Wow.
So
That's awesome. Well, great lineage there. And so you have this military family. You took the track of going towards music. What and it's very similar in like my household. Like Jake, you know, I have two of my sons are in the military, and then Jacob's like, Dad, you know, I want to serenade people. You know, my brothers will kick ass and take names, and then I'll kill them with my music prowess, right, Jake?
Well, actually, all my brothers, I should say, are musically inclined.
Really?
And my youngest brother, Dan, got his bachelor's and master's at Juilliard in
Holy
trombone
cow.
performance, and he ended up playing. He was the principal trombonist for the Singapore Symphony. So when he was in the Air Force, he was involved actually musically. And my oldest brother, Michael, went to Manhattan School of Music as a vocalist, and he's a great musician as well. But when he was a helicopter simulator technician because he's really good with electronics.
But all
too.
of them, they were Air Force.
Yes.
Chose the Air Force.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we've covered the branches. My son's in the Army. My youngest son's in the Army. My oldest son's Coast Guard. And then my wife's dad was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Her stepdad was a MD in the Navy. And then I was the jarhead, the Marine. So, you know, the Marines are a department of the Navy, the men's department. So,
Yeah, my brother Kevin, he was the one who was in the longest. He was in for almost 20 years before he had some medical issues, and he taught at the academy in Colorado. I mean, he had a great career with the Air Force. He's a vocalist and a drummer and plays guitar, so he's also pretty musically inclined.
oh, that's awesome. So, what led your family? So you've got all these musicians in your family. Was your father, mother musically inclined?
Yeah, my mom liked to sing, and my dad was definitely musically inclined. He sang in the choir. He played tenor saxophone. He had a group called the Stardusters, and he was a big fan of people like Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster and Lester Young.
Yeah.
Very good at improvising. Had a real talent for it.
So help me understand this as an educator. You see, and over your career, you've probably seen thousands of students. And I'm sure you can probably tell me, and I don't know if you want to or not, I'm not going to ask you to do that. But I'm sure there's been students that have come through your program. Actually, I will, because I know one of your students is actually a friend of mine, who was part of the Neptunes, and we figured that out a little while ago, was Chad Hugo.
Yes.
And Chad, I thought, and have always thought, he's a musical genius. He's just a savant. What do you think happens with some people in their brain, and they come up, like his parents, great. His dad was in the Navy. His mom served in Department of Defense. But they weren't really musicians, but I think in their Filipino upbringing and family, music, singing, that was part of their culture.
Well, his brother, Victor, was also at ODU, and he got his music ed degree with us, and he's teacher and very talented musician.
He's out on the
as well.
West Coast now, I think, right? Teaching.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
But so you taught Chad. You got any other students that kind of resonate at that level that you think were?
Yeah, I mean, we've had many students who come in through the years and that have the same thing, which is just a natural affinity and talent for it. I have a student right now, Joel Sanford, pianist, that is really strong, very talented. I didn't have him at ODU, but when he was a high school student, Justin Coughlin, who's an amazing jazz pianist who's now produced by Quincy Jones.
Oh, wow.
Came through and played in some of the groups at ODU, et cetera, while he was in high school because he was that strong. And we across the board, like almost every instrument, we've had students come in that are just very, very strong.
Has that ever been studied at a university level where why does it click with some and not with others? And they may have the same IQ, but...
Right. Well, I don't think it has to do with intellect necessarily. I mean, it's like, why is somebody just have a natural affinity for sports, or why is somebody great at, computer games? Or it's just, I think, different strengths come out in people depending on what it is that they're interested in.
So it really just comes back to passion. If a person's passionate about something, that will be their
I think
lead.
It's passion, but also it's natural to a certain extent, just the natural affinity and ability to it.
Their gift.
Yep. And there's just something about the way the neural pathways work that, open up certain possibilities for them, where one thing that's so complicated for one person, for them, it's just like, oh, I see it immediately.
Right.
It's like somebody who's good at code breaking,
Yeah.
for instance. I don't know what you're looking at. They look at it for 5 minutes. Oh, there it is. There's the pattern.
Yeah, I guess, that makes sense to me because like in finance, a lot of this just comes natural for me. I see numbers differently than I think a lot of people. And, I was able to strengthen that skill over the last 25 years. But I found something that I was equally passionate about. I was equally passionate about being a Marine. I thought I was going to be, this door kicker, ass kicker kind of guy. But I found out that I really enjoyed math, and I enjoyed specifically like the consumer finance side of math. And so that affinity to, financial planning, I was like, wow.
Well, you could kick the door in and threaten them with higher interest rates.
That's right.
I'm going to double your mortgage rate. That's very scary, and it could be an effective technique. I think the government should, because that's some serious consideration.
That's right. Yeah, that we may be seeing that in the future, actually. So what led you to be an educator? And at what point did you say in your life, okay, I'm pretty good at this piano. What do you play besides piano?
The radio? No. I play a little bit of guitar.
Okay.
Even though Beth Baker would say, no, you don't, because she's used to hearing her dad play, who's amazing. But
and Beth Baker, excuse my ignorance, who's Beth?
Oh, that's one of my students.
Beth, okay.
One of my students.
Oh. No, okay, sorry, Noah. I wasn't putting two and two
Noah's
together.
sister.
Noah's
Yes.
sister. Famously Noah's sister, right? Beth?
That's right.
So Beth is a pretty good guitarist, huh?
Well, actually, she's a strong pianist. But her dad, Chris Baker, who's a good friend of mine, is an amazing guitarist. Just talk about somebody with incredible natural ability who just picks it up. It's like, here we go. He was a person who was absolutely born to play that instrument.
Actually, he plays with you at church, Jacob, and right? So shout out to Mr. Baker. So
Yes, extremely fluid.
that's all. Maybe we should have him on the show one day and
You should. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to.
bring him in. And Noah's giving me the.
I think you should have the entire family. And as a matter of fact, let's call them and get them right now.
That would be cool. We'll embarrass Noah. That's right. So for you personally, how old were you when you started playing piano?
Oh, I can answer that question. Actually, my lessons began after Christmas when I was in 6th grade. So my dad would play music all the time, especially on Sundays. We would have a meal, and he would always put something on the stereo. And my oldest brother, Michael, got a piano for free, and he was taking lessons. I didn't know anything about music, but I would hear these melodies, and then I'd go down to the piano, and I'd start playing them on the piano by ear. So I had interest, and I asked for lessons, and then I got a card with Santa Claus sitting at a grand piano saying, "You're going to get piano lessons." So that's when I started.
Very cool. Yeah, I was 6 and I got piano lessons at church. And one year, I took them for 1 year. And I don't remember what happened, but just a series of events where I didn't have piano lessons anymore. But I loved music. I loved clunking. And what's interesting in our family is that I would guess Jacob was probably 10 years old. And one Christmas, we would do these themed Christmases. And now we're getting ready to come into Thanksgiving, and Christmas is coming up as an appropriate conversation. For my kids, I got them all an instrument. None of them knew how to play anything, but they had an affinity. They loved when we'd go to church, they would love plunking and messing around with the different instruments. So I got a drum set, an electric guitar, a bass guitar, a keyboard, and the keyboard I got was a black. Do you remember what the model was? Chad Hugo actually gave me the keyboard. And it was a little miniature grand piano. And he signed the inside of it. And then I gave it away to the Bowman kids, who later became Graffiti Gray. But at any rate, we went through this Christmas, and all the kids had an instrument that they were plunking around with. Fast forward from that, no one really took off with it. Sarah was doing a little bit of piano. I think Jacob was really interested in the drums, but didn't really pick up the guitar until maybe 4 years later. I had a Takanimi guitar that I had for one of these artists that I was trying to help produce, and Dave Hummel and I were working with, and the band imploded, and as many musical artists do, they kind of gave up. But this guitar was in my office closet, and Jacob just walked in one day and said, "Hey, Dad, do you mind if I take that guitar and go home and try to play it a little bit?" I went, "Dude, that'd be awesome. Take it, enjoy it." This thing called YouTube sparked his interest in guitar, and he actually self-taught and then went to Liberty University and went in a music program there. And learn some of the theory side. But it blows me away when I hear him play to this day that I can remember he was playing Blackbird one night by the Beatles. And I'm like, who the heck is doing that? And go upstairs, and it's my son Jacob just going to town. I'm like, how did you learn that? YouTube. Taught him how to play.
Oh, I can relate totally. My daughter, Charlotte, taught herself how to play ukulele and guitar solely via YouTube.
She couldn't get lessons from her dad. She went to YouTube.
Nope, she went to YouTube because I don't know that much on guitar. And, I was like, oh, here are some chords. And within, I would say, a month or two, she had, tripled her chordal knowledge beyond mine easily. And she's still playing now and singing. As a matter of fact, I record her. She sounds great. So I just set up a Zoom H2 and used GarageBand and record her and put some reverb on it. She wants to do a coffee house.
That's cool.
So that would be fun.
How many children do you have?
Well, I have Charlotte, and then I have my son, Jonathan, who was in the Navy, by the way, for 4 years.
Oh, thank you for your service, Jonathan.
Yeah, he went over to Japan. He was stationed in Japan.
Okay. Probably Okinawa?
No, it starts with an S, and now I've forgotten it. Sounds like sub or something, but yep.
Yeah, you got me there.
He loved it. Thought it was great.
That's all. What's he a musician? Does he play?
He actually played some trumpet, but he's not really a performing musician.
Okay.
No, so.
But he's got the gene in him. He can pick up an instrument and fake it like me a little bit on the piano.
Yeah, he can sit down at the piano and play a little bit of the Moonlight Sonata, for instance.
Wow,
kind of cool.
That's impressive. So you're now tenured at Old Dominion University.
That happened a long time ago because if you're hired by a university as a tenure track professor, you normally are on a clock of about 6 years. So
Okay.
you're hired, and then you're told, okay, you've got 6 years to show us what you're capable of doing, not only in the classroom, but what you are capable of producing in the research area. And that's exceedingly important, just as important as the teaching.
All right, so you got to explain this to me. Research as it relates to jazz.
Okay.
What do you research?
What type of drugs to use? No, I'm just kidding.
Psychedelics,
That's right.
mushrooms.
Yes. Yeah, I prefer the the hallucinogenics. So what your research is going to be based on, it could be published research. Like, for instance, I could say, well, I'm going to my research component is going to be publication. So maybe I'm going to write a book or two about jazz, or start writing articles about jazz.
Yeah.
But in my case, it was performance. So my research component was based on performance. So what they were looking for me to do then was to perform, and not perform on campus or even so much locally. They wanted something that showed outside, like either outside of the state, nationally, or even internationally. That's what they're looking for.
Okay.
So you can show that you're considered to be, fairly well known in your field, that type of thing.
Is there a PhD in jazz, or
I
have
think
you?
now there is, yes.
Okay.
I think you could probably get a PhD in jazz studies or jazz history. Back when I went to Eastman, the master's was considered to be the terminal degree.
Okay.
And that's why I still have a job, and why I was able to get tenured, because at that point,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, no, there is no doctorate in jazz, so this is the highest level degree you can attain.
So, what do you think, in order to earn your doctorates in jazz, what would a PhD have to discover or share with a board?
I think it would depend on what the slant of the doctorate was. It could be a doctorate that was more performance-based, and then you would be continuing to study and maybe compose and perform and maybe write music, et cetera. Or it could be educationally based, or it could be based on research.
Yeah.
Where maybe you were going to do something like interview great jazz artists and put together a series of articles or a book, et cetera. And, you create a thesis, and then you have to defend it, that type of thing. So,
Wow. That's way above my IQ and pay grade here, but cool to have a little better understanding. So for you, your students at ODU, the field that you really try to get your students educated in, what do they go out and do after they get an undergrad or a master's in?
well,
music?
in our area, we have X amount of different programs. So one of our bigger degrees is music education. And we're extremely successful. I would say like a high 90, maybe like 99% placement ratio, if not 100. Our kids are
Wow.
getting jobs in this area. And if you go to, the local school systems, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, et cetera, Chesapeake, you're going to find many of our graduates are teaching, and they're
Yeah.
placed. Then they might come back and get their master's degree from us in music education. But we also offer a degree in composition. We offer degrees in performance. And we have a Bachelor of Arts degree, and within that degree, there are different focus areas. And one of the focus areas in our Bachelor of Arts is jazz studies. And I should mention, and this is important, we have a sound recording technology degree now. So we have a beautiful recording studio.
That's
You're
awesome.
learning how, you take 4 different courses in Pro Tools, et cetera. And when you come out, you understand how to sit behind a pro level board, work it, how to edit with Pro Tools, and you could do something like run this podcast and beyond, right?
So instead of going down maybe to Orlando, Florida, to one of your competitor schools like Full Sail, young people in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton Roads area.
Oh, they could come here, and they could have a hands-on experience that way. Yep.
Wow.
Matter of fact, the jazz combo, the student jazz combo that I just led, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a video of them in the recording studio.
Yeah.
We just went in the recording studio a few weeks ago and laid down 3 tunes with the combo. So
Would it be possible for us to come in one day and check out your school? And
no.
No, can't do that.
I don't think I'd be interested. No, I'm just kidding. Sure.
Like,
we love to give tours.
Yeah.
And it's especially, thank you very much. I'll be here for the next 45 minutes. We really like to show off our facilities and also meet with prospective students. As a matter of fact, we constantly tell students in high school, just contact us, come stay with us for a day, and you'll go through classes and we'll show you our facilities. You get an idea of what we have to offer and what it's like.
I would love to help share that. So if we could, we'll get a camera crew together one day and come out and
That would be awesome.
follow you around, ask you some questions again, and we'll put
That
it
would be
back
a lot
on
of fun.
our podcast. Yeah, I'd love
Yes.
to do that, especially since I've had friends who have gone on with uber success from your school, and you know the Neptunes, Chad and Pharrell.
Sure.
How many Grammys are there now? I think that's a few dozen. That they've got to come back and say, hey, you know, Dr. Toomey. See, I made you a doctor again. Did you like that?
Yeah, it was nice. Chad was interviewed, I think, last summer, maybe, in the paper, and he mentioned ODU, and I think he mentioned myself and also Dennis Eisler, who sadly is no longer with us, as people that kind of influenced him, you know, when he was working at ODU. He played great saxophone. When he was with
I've
me, I
heard
remember
him play
uh,
personally. It's
he
beautiful.
took jazz sax lessons with me, you know, to dig into improvisation, and I remember him transcribing a John Coltrane solo.
Yeah.
And nailing it, you know, just playing it perfectly.
Isn't it pretty cool that Hampton Roads, I mean, we've had some amazing athletes come out of this region, but there's been some pretty amazing musicians, and you brought up some, what I would call old school guys with Bob Smith, Robert Smith, the Earwork Studio,
Uh-huh.
which is where
Rob
I'm
Walsh at Master Sound.
Rob Walsh at Master Sound.
So busy all the time.
You know, everybody hears the big names like Teddy Riley and, you know, Timbaland and the Neptunes, but those guys were really the anchors of some of these early young people who are now, you know, I think the Neptunes are about, I'm 51, and I think Pharrell's probably close to my age. Sorry, Pharrell, if I'm telling on you.
Well, you know,
Your age.
at Earworks with Bob Smith, he is really the person who got me back into doing studio work when I got here. He just called me out of the blue to do, I don't know if you remember the company HQ. It was kind of like...
Yeah. This used to be the headquarters, my
That's
office
so
building
funny.
here.
Okay, so they did a Season of Giving CD
Okay.
to raise money, and it was released around Thanksgiving. And Bob asked me to be involved in that, so I did 3 Christmas Carol arrangements with a jazz quartet, and that's how we met. And then that led to me him hiring me to do jingles for different things, and then also started doing documentaries for like Cinnabar and New Dominion Pictures, and those ended up on, you know, History Channel, Learning Channel, Discovery. That was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. So, John, that's what's really interesting to me. A lot of times I was teasing you before we went on camera that, you know, those who can't teach, and I don't think that's really true in your profession.
No, with me, it's I can do, but I can't teach. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. There'd be something to argue that.
What's a test exactly?
Yes.
Someone explain it.
But switching over to your performance side, you brought some CDs with you today. Tell us a little bit about Refraction. This is with John Toomey Trio.
Right. So with Refraction, the project there was kind of nice. My chair at the time said, you know, you've been teaching for so long, it's time for a sabbatical if you'd like to take one. So you can take a semester off and focus on research. I said, okay.
Kidding.
I'd like to maybe I'd like to record a CD.
Okay.
And at first, it wasn't going to be original compositions, but every morning I would wake up and just start playing a little bit and started writing some things down. And before I knew it, I had a CD's worth of original compositions to record.
Wow.
And Jim Cook was the president of ODU, and Dennis Eisler, who was the chair at that time, said, go talk to the president. He's a fan of yours. Maybe he can help you with some of the costs. So I talked to the president, and he actually agreed to subsidize the entire project. So during my sabbatical, I wrote all this and then went into Master Sound with Rob Walsh.
Shout out to Rob.
Howard Curtis, incredible drummer who's now teaching at Graz, Austria, one of the top programs in the world. And then Jimmy Masters, awesome bass player, top bassist, is on that. And we went into Master Sound and recorded it. And it ended up getting reviewed by Downbeat. So very lucky that happened. So.
Wow. So when you came up with these original compositions, where did you have to go mentally? So what's like your writing style?
Right. So for that one, what I didn't want to do is make it sound traditional. I wanted to go with more of what I would call an ECM or European type of sound, more open, straight eighth notes, less typical chord progressions.
Straight eighth notes. You get that, Jake?
So, that's really the vibe of that particular CD.
So what kind of sound could I compare that to? When you say straight eighth notes, you call out my ignorance here. What does
I
that
would have
mean?
to say, like, listen to somebody like Bobo Stenson on piano, or just listen to any product released by ECM. That's this label where they would go for this a bit more modern type of approach.
Yeah.
Really kind of a cool sound, and it's just kind of different.
Yeah.
You know?
So what's interesting to me is that, you were born in the 50s. The birth of rock and roll really was taken off then. But what drove a young man like yourself back then towards jazz?
Well, I listened to things like Carole King, James Taylor, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and anything that had hipper chords in it that were fatter, or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, right, with all the keyboard work. Those things would appeal to me, and they would just kind of catch my ear. But I really didn't even start playing jazz per se until I went to college.
Really?
Yep.
And what was the switch?
Yeah, it was a big turning point for me, actually. My first semester, I didn't even audition for the big band there. And there were like 600 majors at this school. It was very big. So I was like, what's the point? But then the second semester, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And I had never, ever actually even played with a jazz drummer or a acoustic bass player walking a bass line. So I'm sitting there in the audition, and I start playing, and I'm like, wow, this feels really good. So that's the first time that I really
Do you think it feels good because of the freedom that you get with jazz versus
Well, I would
classical?
say the key for me, first and foremost, was the rhythmic feel, because hearing a drummer who really knew how to swing and then hearing a walking bass under that gives you this pulse and feel that you're not going to find in any other type of music except jazz. Yeah. So I got in the band. I got accepted. And that semester, it just so happened that the guest artist was going to be Marion McPartland, who's a famous jazz pianist.
Okay.
So as we're rehearsing for the semester, every piece we're practicing is a piano feature. So I got to practice a lot and, play all the solo stuff. And then, of course, she came for the concert. So the concert's in a hall that seats like 2,000 people. It's packed. She's up on stage playing, and I'm in the audience listening, like, this is awesome. And for the last number, the director says, we have a surprise. Our pianist played these all semester. Come on up, John. And they wheel a second concert grand out, put it next to hers. And he says, this last number, we're going to let them go back and forth on. So when it comes to the solo part, he just opens it up, and we start trading 16s and 4s back and forth. And it was amazing, what a great experience. And by the end of it, like, everyone's just up in there, standing up, screaming. And I went from, not really doing much in jazz to all the people that I would listen to every weekend playing jazz gigs coming up to me and asking me, will you play with us this summer? So I went from nothing to like, wow, you're going to be playing all the time.
If you would educate me a little bit, and again, I apologize for my ignorance. These guys behind the scenes today, they know exactly what you mean when you say 16s and 4s.
So in other words, she would improvise a phrase, and then I would answer. So it was like having a musical conversation back and forth, and it's almost like a duel. I'm playing, now you respond. Now I'm playing, you respond. It's like a musical challenge.
So I hear musicians talk about numbers all the time, and those 16. What does that mean?
That means how many measures. Like 4 bars would be, if in 4/4, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 bars. Okay. So if you're trading 4s, you cover those 4, then the next person covers the next 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me is there's a lot of folks, both in the jazz and blues world, that weren't formally or trained, with a what we would say a traditional education in music.
Right.
But there's some of the most amazing musicians.
Right, because they just hear it and feel it naturally. And, theory is after the fact, right? For instance, the rules and regulations we have when we write out a 4-part chorale in a theory class, that's based on a treatise that someone came up with by analyzing the chorales of Bach and saying, hey, 80% of the time, when he goes from a 5-chord to a 1-chord, he's got T to Do in a soprano. So let's make that a rule. That's how to end a cadence. So now you analyze those and after the fact write it because it sounds good. So music theory is basically, what works because it works and sounds pleasing to the ear. So you don't have to study a book to pick up an instrument and work with it and start to discover, I like this motion.
I heard an interesting performance at the Z. Shout out to, I sat on the board of the Z, great musical theater, or performing theater. There was a guy last summer before COVID that was actually taking classical music and playing it in reverse. Jake, weren't you there with me? Do you remember that guy's name? I'm going to have to put it up on the episode because it was
His
so
name was
intriguing.
Dan Telfer.
Dan Telfer. You ever heard of him? Dan Telfer actually had, I think it was Yamaha piano, actually helped him take, Bach as an example, and rearranged his songs in reverse and started with the end at the beginning. And it was absolutely intriguing and beautiful to hear that you were playing some of these Bach performances in reverse, and they still sounded amazing. And he did it to lights and all kinds of crazy stuff. So you should check it out on the Z site. But what makes that available, like in jazz or in classical? Why is that a thing? How can that happen? Is that science of music? What?
Well, everything is, I mean, music, when you come right down to it, you could say basically it's just tension and release, right? And if you'd had no tension, like if you sat down at the piano and you played nothing but just the black keys, you'd be playing a G-flat pentatonic scale, which is like wind chimes that you buy, right? The big thick ones.
Yeah,
It's like,
okay.
the wind blows and it always sounds good. But after a while, it's like it sounds good, but it never changes.
Yeah.
So in music, what you really want is tension and then release. So you have these chords that lead to one another. And you could, depending on the progression, go backwards and still hear those resolutions kind of occurring and forming.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The science of music. And for you, is that something you get really passionate about with your students, or do you find yourself getting more passionate about it when you're composing yourself?
Well, I guess with my students, the first thing that I'm trying to do with them is teach them kind of the more typical stay in the box rules and have them get that under their fingers and really make that a part of them. Once they have that, then the next step is to encourage them to think about breaking some of the rules, and seeing, do you think you could do this instead? And some of the best music often does just that, right? It changes things. Just like, the difference from, say, Baroque and classical to Impressionism. It's like, well, what is Debussy doing? I mean, what's the harmonic, basis for that based on what was happening in the Baroque period? And the answer is it's not really related because he was playing it first for sound's sake. It sounds nice. Just like, the painting of Monet, right? Versus, say, an artist that was painting to look photographically perfect.
Is there anything that frustrates you about the current culture of music and where it's been more synthesized, more technologically driven than artistic capability?
Well, it is, I think, somewhat unfortunate that, like back in the 80s and even the 90s to a certain extent, you could make a living as a studio musician. I knew people when I was living in Cincinnati who they made good money, and they were constantly playing on projects like Jingles, et cetera, and they were solid musicians.
The Rob Walsh of the world would call them and say, "Hey, I need a bass line put down."
Or like Bob Smith was telling me, I don't really do much of that soundtracking stuff anymore with custom stuff. I just use a library, a digital library that's available.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad. On the other hand, it has opened up a different landscape for people who can sit there and organize and put together, a score just literally just on their dining room table with a laptop and a keyboard and, thousands of high quality sounds. The danger of that, of course, is anyone can do that, anyone with varied skill levels. So sometimes you'll hear people put things together that just don't really work, but then you'll hear people put things together that sound absolutely beautiful.
It's funny you say that. You made me think about this little app I just downloaded for my grandson called GroovePad.
Okay.
And there's some jazz stuff in here.
Right. It's got loops, right?
And loops, yeah. And I can just, I won't do it. I might be copyright infringement or something, but check out GroovePad.
I know what you're talking about. I mean, GarageBand has that availability to choose loops. When I'm using GarageBand, I'll play myself, and the keyboard can manipulate everything from drums to bass to strings to French horn to piano. But you could, if you're not that facile at the keyboard, you could just find a loop that you like to put in.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
And then you start creating that way by just making, choosing different combinations that may be somewhat atypical. So.
Do you find that students who are coming into the program now, do you feel like they have a higher acumen at entry level than maybe what some of your earlier students had in, say, in the 1990s because of so much technology today? Has it helped or hurt?
They certainly know more about technology. They're much more comfortable with it, and often they're ahead of us. It's like, just do it this way, or why are you using that? So. And that can be very helpful.
Yeah.
I would say also our standards for admission into the music program have really consistently gone up.
Really?
Okay. The last 3 decades. Oh, yes, significantly. So we are just, we're demanding more and we're attracting higher level students. So
is there an audition that a student has to go through?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So you just can't be, hey, I want to learn music at the collegiate level. You have to come in with some knowledge.
That's right. Now, the Bachelor of Arts in Music is put together as kind of an exploratory degree. So that is one where you could come in with not a lot of, technical prowess on an instrument and still absolutely come through that program and learn about it. But for all the other degrees, you need to be able to play at a specific level to be able to start. So most of our kids have studied.
Yeah.
They've played in groups in high school, and maybe they've studied privately too, and they have a certain level of proficiency already together.
Has the school done anything on the business side of artist management, the music business?
Right. So in the SRT degree, we have a course called Music Business.
Okay.
Right? And I think right now Daniel Booth is teaching that for us. He's an amazing musician, and he's had all sorts of varied experiences in music. So he's a great choice for that. And that's locked in and married to the SRT degree, which makes sense.
And SRT stands for what?
Sound recording technology.
Sound recording.
So if you're learning how to produce and how to mix, et cetera, I think knowing about the business aspects of that too, licensing, et cetera, entrepreneurial studies. And then, of course, we have I think it's called the Strom Center for Entrepreneurship at ODU. That's a very strong program that can reach out to all disciplines.
Wow. I'm going to try to get, when I come out to see and bring the camera with us, I'd love to try to bring my friend Zerbin along too.
Oh, sure.
And see if he, great mixer, great engineer.
Right.
And see if I can get him to come check out your school. I think you'd appreciate meeting him. And
yeah, we're pretty excited about that recording studio. It's nice. We've got a nice tracking room, and we have a large space with drums set up, and then we have an ISO booth as well. And our recording studio also goes out to, let me think about this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different spaces completely separated. Like it's connected digitally to the choir room, the percussion studio, and then 3 different ensemble rooms.
wow.
So we could get pretty intense if we wanted to with making a recording.
Man, I'm excited to come check it out. It seems awesome. How many students are applying to come in your program each year?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not the person to ask that. That would be Dr. Owen's question, because he's the one who handles our templates for all that. But it's a good amount, and it's growing. So
fabulous. Taking you back again, which I promised I would, taking you back from educator to performer, we talked a little bit about refractions, and we've got 2 more you brought with you today. Reminiscence.
Oh, yes.
Did I say that right? It looks.
Yeah, that's with John Fedchuk. So John Fedchuk is like a world-famous trombonist. He actually went to Eastman, but he's on the New York scene. He's been up for Grammys. He's probably won some. He's got a small group, and he's also got a big band. So,
what's the difference between this album or CD than Refractions?
Okay, well, first of all, the fact that it features a trombone instead of just piano, bass, and drums.
Okay.
Completely different approach, and different stylistically, too. So he's just unbelievably, he's really tall. He can just keep a tone going forever. He gets right up on the mic, has this beautiful sound, and he can play really fast. And that's kind of interesting to hear on a trombone, an instrument that, just physically it's hard to do because you're constantly moving the slide around. He's one of the top in the world. He's constantly, running around as guest artist for this and that with the best groups. I think he just recorded with Airmen of Note, actually.
Wow.
So I used to be music director for Havana Nights, which was a club right in the Virginia Beach Town Center. And
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
around for about 2 years or so, and that was like Christmas for me because not only did we put together this beautiful jazz club that was very intimate with a great piano and great sound system. Pete Cosmos, who's kind of world famous audio specialist, designed the whole thing, and he came in and recorded because that was recorded at Havana Nights live.
No kidding.
So kind of unique.
Why do you think Havana Nights didn't make it? I mean, what?
It was a lot of things at once because it was not only just a jazz club, it was a cigar club upstairs with a special membership and also a restaurant. So I just think it was so much to try to do at the same time that it became kind of hard.
And it was around the financial crisis too, right? I mean, I remember when Town Center first opened, there was a lot of cool shops that just didn't make it through 2008.
So the cool thing about that, though, that run was every month I got to choose a famous jazz artist, contact them and invite them to come in and play for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And that was with my trio. So we had so many famous people. John Abercrombie came in. Oh, my gosh, just incredible. John Fedchuk was in. I think Randy Brecker. You know, it was amazing. It was like a who's who of jazz. And they would come in and they would stay in that beautiful hotel that's still there. Is it the Westin?
Westin.
Yeah. And then just walk over, literally 2 doors down, and come in and play this jazz gig. So we would learn their music ahead of time, and they'd come in and we'd play Joe Locke, vibraphonist. It was awesome, and we recorded those 2 CDs with John Fedchuk in there live, and he released them with Summit on the Summit label.
That's awesome. So folks can find these CDs.
I'm sure they could, yeah. If they just typed in John Fedchuk, they're going to see these CDs showing up.
We'll put it on our website and up on YouTube for folks to go grab those. Switching gears, and we'll come back to the last CD in just a few minutes. But what intrigues me is one, you know, just the beauty of music and jazz. But what also concerns me for musicians, the large majority of musicians, their financial literacy, and we were talking about this pre-production, pre-show, just like so many people in the numerous industries, but it seems to me that people in theater and, you know, the arts in general are usually, you know, they're looked at as these starving artists. So when you're educating young people at ODU and, you know, fine universities across America, how much time do you think is spent in school to say, all right, look, you're passionate about jazz, you're passionate about classical. How are you going to make a living at this? What do you do as a teacher to help students come to reality?
I think that when you're working on an undergraduate degree, often if you're, say, in performance, there's an expectation that most likely you're going to continue on into graduate school. So we're probably not having a lot of conversations about that issue there because we know that, you know, they're going to continue on.
Yeah.
But however, for our music ed people, they are, you know, when they're done with us after 4 years, they're employable and they start working. They're in the workforce as teachers.
Yeah, I think you said earlier that it was about a 99%.
Oh yeah, it's very, very high.
Job placement.
Right. And for our other degrees, I think there's an expectation there's probably going to be more advanced degree work going on after that.
Yeah.
You know? So they're not quite ready yet to start, you know, making the money. They're probably still looking for ways to subsidize their education.
Right. So how many people you think come through your program where they've got this big side of grandeur of they're going to be the next Miles Davis, or they're going to be the next major jazz artist that's really going to make it? And how many are like, I'm just here to get an undergrad degree, become a teacher? What do you think the mix is?
Right. I think that we have X amount of students who absolutely come in with a passion for teaching. They were inspired by their teachers. They were, you know, they're really happy about all the experiences they had in high school and junior high being involved in music, and they have a passion, and their dream is to learn how to do that themselves so they can now open that up for incoming students. So they're meeting their goal right there. As far as, you know, our performance majors, I would hope that their aspirations are lofty and pretty high, because I think that's where you want to start. You probably don't want to start with, if I could just play better than Jimmy, then I'm ready to go, But rather, I want to just drive.
I remember Chad Hugo, that in his junior year at ODU, he begged his mom to actually, I forget the keyboard, but it was pretty expensive. It may have been like an 88 key chord or something like that. But instead of making the tuition payment to ODU, he convinced her to buy a keyboard so that he could lay some samples, do some beats, and hang out with this guy, Pharrell.
Well, that was a good choice.
But he talks about, the foundation that he got from his music training from the school. But then his junior year, he was kind of like an athlete. It's like some of your basketball players, baseball players at ODU, they get to a certain point and they're like, I can come back and finish this last year. The prime time for me to go pro is now. Mm-hmm. How often do you see that happen with musicians? Is it the outlier?
I would say it's not typical, but it certainly can happen. It really comes down to connections. Yeah. It's all about connections. Yeah. And I was just talking to my students about this in jazz improv the other day, about connections. And I was saying, look, when I was at Eastman, I was asked to audition to play the second piano part for a show called Keystone, which was a musical theater production. And they wanted somebody who could just improvise a second piano part, looking at the score, along with the other pianist. So I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. I auditioned for it. I got it. I played it. It was like a 3-week run, paid some good money, and I figured, well, that's it. A year later, Lance Moquet, the composer, calls me up. We're going off-Broadway, and this is going to be produced at MacArthur Theater, which is part of Princeton University, for 2 months. I'd like you to come back and be assistant music director. Would you like to do it? I was like, sure. So I did that, and oh, by the way, Scott Bakula was the lead in the first production I did. Isn't that funny?
We've got to put these names on YouTube so folks can go back and know who they are.
Yeah, it's like, who's Scott Bakula? Quantum Leap, and he was on Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
So then I figured, okay, well, this is awesome. I got 2 things out of it. A year later, he calls me up. Hey, New Jersey Network wants to make a movie out of this. Like, really? Yeah, and this time I want you to be music director. So each time the salary went up, and this was in New York City. So I lived in an apartment on 63rd Street for free for 2 months. They picked me up in a Lincoln Town Car every day, drove me to rehearsal, and paid me a bunch of money. And then a year after that, it was bought by Sony Pictures and shown on national TV, and I got my check again because of residuals. And all that came from just deciding, I guess I'll audition for this, and see what happens. Yeah. So you just never know.
So the moral of the story is that you in my industry, in the financial services industry, people come in, they'll get their CFP, they'll get these designations, they may even get a master's in financial services. But I have seen so many people in my industry who have become educated derelicts, meaning they had this education, but they wouldn't talk to people. They were just full of knowledge, full of information. But when you would say, hey, it's time to process people, to share with them the knowledge that you can transfer from your brain housing group to theirs and actually get compensated for it. I had many friends that starting out in this business just aren't in this business anymore, and they're way smarter than me. But what I did that was better than a lot of people in my industry is that I processed people. I asked lots of questions, and I was hungry for knowledge of about you and what you're doing, and then tried to be a connector.
Yep, and making connections, I mean, in music, like I could think of some of the kids recently that I had in my jazz combo that are now graduated, and they would play together all the time, and they would record in that recording studio. I think it's called the Sun Band, and they're doing well. And they're
That's
playing,
awesome.
and they're developing an audience now. And it's because instead of just staying in their room and practicing, they made sure that they, reached out to make music with other people and thought about things conceptually and took advantage of the fact that we have a recording studio and they could go in there and lay down tracks and start to develop a style and a sound and then do something with it.
I had an employee here, John, that left. Zach left 4 months ago. And I'm a big cheerleader of entrepreneurship. no matter what field it's in, you know, I so much endorse going out and giving it a shot at whatever your passion is. So this young man, Zach, comes to me and says, "Hey, Kenny, you know, the financial services industry is not really my passion. I want to be in the music business." So I made some introductions for him. He had some himself. What I appreciate, even though it's a little crazy, maybe it's a little early and he did it during the COVID period, he's doing it now where there's not a lot of strings attached. He doesn't have 3 or 4 kids at home. He's not married. He still has a place at home that his parents let him call home. But he left to follow his passion. And, you know, a lot of people would say, "Man, you're crazy. You had a good job at KP & Co. at Kenneth Porter and Company," who's one of our sponsors of the show here. But he drove himself into a position of going, I'm basically theoretically burning my boat at the beach, right? And I'm going for it. And he asked me my opinion. I was like, you got to go give it a shot. For me to tell you would be selfish for me to say, you stay here, serve my purpose. Go give it a shot. If you fail, dust yourself off, get up and figure out why you failed and go do it again. And, you know, one of the things I've seen, going back to this thing about the music business, which is much like sports in my mind's eye, that everyone wants to reach the top in their not everyone, but so many people who want to do it at a high level where, you know, they're getting music deals or they're getting signed. How do you govern that with students who have that passion to, you know, just go set the world on fire with their music? What kind of encouragement or what kind of advice can you give them outside of the classroom to say, think about it this way?
Well, I think the best advice would be, you know, put as much time as you can into practicing and developing the art form, and, you know, direct your attention to what you're passionate about. If there's a particular style, particular instrument, et cetera, you know, really look at that. And take advantage of opportunities that come up, different opportunities. Don't close doors, and keep working and see what opens up.
That's what's intriguing about you, and I think that's advice that you've applied to your own life, obviously, because outside of the classroom as an educator, as a teacher, you've been a practitioner. You've actually made money in your industry. You've had businesses of a going concern by what you've produced. And this last CD here was with Glenn Wilson, John the Earth.
Right. Glenn Wilson and John Dirth, they talked together so well, talk about great communicators. Glenn is a top-level bari sax player. John Dirth, incredible trumpet player. These are both people that, you know, jazz musicians that are professionals would recognize and say, oh, awesome players. And they, I brought them into Havana Nights, and we had a quintet. So it was those 2 horns, and then piano, bass, and drums. And
Tony
Martucci on drums, great,
drums,
and Jimmy Masters again on bass, killer player. So we, you know, they picked some pieces that they'd like to go for a recording. We played 3 nights in a row, and Pete Cosmos, the person who designed the sound, recorded all of it, and then he mixed all of that. And Cadence Records, that Glenn has an association with, listened to it and said, yeah, we want this. And they picked it up for their label, and it's in their stable now, which is great.
You only brought 3 with you today, but you were telling me earlier you've got a trunk full of...
Right, there's more that I've been involved with. One of the ones I'm proud of is called Live at the Jazz Standard, and that's with a vocalist, Renee Marie, who's really well known.
Okay.
I toured with her for 2 years. The Jazz Standard is a pretty famous jazz club in New York City.
Okay.
So we went in there, and it was a 3-night hit, and they recorded every night and then chose the best tracks and put that out. So that's another live experience, which I think is kind of fun. Yeah. To really capture that energy. We toured all over the place. I mean, geez, I played the JVC Festival in Paris with her. We did the Monterey Festival in California.
Have you made it to New Orleans and the Jazz Festival down
there?
there?
Actually, the New Orleans Festival I played with Maynard Ferguson, because I was out with him for 2 years. And we did a month in Japan with Maynard. That was awesome. We did, Rene Marie. I mean, we went all over the place. Bahama Jazz Festival.
Oh, wow.
Dominican Republic Jazz Festival. It was awesome because back then my wife and I, we didn't have any kids yet. So we'd get these gigs and I'm like, hey, I'm taking you to Dominican Republic for your birthday. And we just hang there for like 4 days and I play these hits. And it was great. I also played with Mark Murphy, who is no longer with us. Unbelievably famous jazz vocalist. And maybe the best gig of my life.
Really?
Was when he called me up and said, I'm going to do a week at Birdland in New York City. Would you like to play? It's like, are you kidding? So I was like, hey, I'll pay you to do the gig. So a week in New York City, everything paid for, beautiful club, the best jazz vocalist ever, Mark Murphy, and guys like Tim Horner playing drums, Dave Fink on bass, just the top people in their profession. Wow. And I got to sit there and play every night with them. It was awesome.
So if you could put together an all-star set like today of folks who are still with us today, and you said, look, I'm going to put together a night where I'm going to have the best drummer, and I might be putting you on the spot and hurting some of your friends' feelings.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a really hard decision to make, I can tell you right now. But I tell you what, when I think about drummers, Howard Curtis, so beautiful. Also, I was lucky to play with Billy Drummond, either last year or the year before, for the Virginia Arts Festival, the Jazz at the Attic series. That's a 7-month thing where every month we get to choose a great jazz musician and they play with my trio. He was unbelievable. So he would be up there.
So bass player?
Jimmy Masters is just such a great player.
Wow.
He really...
horns?
He hears when I'm playing. I can't even get started. There's so many fantastic horns. It would really be difficult to make a choice.
Yeah.
I would say, though, if he was still alive, I would love to play with Clark Terry again. Oh, my God. What a joyful musician he was.
That's awesome. Now, I guess yourself on the keys, right? So,
well, we could find so many people that would be so much better. Maybe I'd hire Justin Coughlin and ask him to play piano. Yeah, it'd be great to listen to him play. He's incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
Does ODU do any type of jazz performing arts with the young students and showcasing their talent?
Okay, well, I probably should have mentioned this, so I'm glad you asked. But we have a jazz residency program every April. Right now,
a jazz residency.
Right, it's been compromised by COVID. But what that means is I pick a famous jazz artist. The university pays for them to come stay like a week with us, and they work with our students.
Oh,
and then we actually give a concert as part of that residency that features the jazz combo, the jazz choir, and the jazz orchestra. And with each one of those groups, they play with this famous artist. And then the next night, they play a concert that's ticketed with my trio. Wow. So that's been great outreach, and we have clinics attached to that, like 3, and we invite high schools to join us. And the Jazz at the Attics, thanks to the Virginia Arts Festival, often 3 or 4 of the artists that I bring in for that program, we offer clinics, and they bring the artists to high schools in the morning, and then the artist comes to ODU, which is open to the public, anyone who wants to come for free, and they come to us. So yes,
that's awesome.
We not only but the Virginia Arts Festival is really also very much involved with community outreach. You know, our program, the department gives over 200 concerts every year, and those are almost all of them are open and free to the public.
Wow.
So,
you know, I could spend a lot of time with you today just asking you more questions about the program, but we promised to get you out of here at 1:30.
Yes, I have to go take pictures.
You got your movie set that you got to get prepared
there you go.
for. So I want to keep to my word and get you out on time. But I'd love to come back with the team and come over to the school if we could. And
I'd absolutely
be
help
very
excited to
the
do
program.
That. Yes, that'd be great.
So thank you so much, John.
Thank you for having me.
Master Toomey, for coming on the show today. I know you're a very busy man, and you know during the COVID crisis that we're still going through, there's a lot going on. So thanks for carving out some time to share with us about your personal passion with jazz, and then as a professor at Old Dominion University. Go Monarchs! We appreciate your time you've given us today.
All right, thank you so much for having me.
Happy Thanksgiving, and God bless you and your family.
All right.